And so there are people who are like, how could you play Final Fantasy XIV and not be into the story? How could you play Final Fantasy XIV and not do Savage? How could you play Final Fantasy XIV and not try other jobs? How could you play Final Fantasy XIV and not even do crafting or gathering? Or whatever it is. Whatever it is, somebody has played for 10,000 hours, and some portion of that, hunts, whatever it is, has become such a big part of their life that they immediately assume that everybody else's life has followed that trajectory, and anybody that's not there is either wrong or new. MMOs in general have two distinct complaints: new MMO hype versus reality, and that MMOs weren't designed for the 10,000 hour users. They're designed to be fun, especially with friends. So have fun. If you stay for 10,000 hours and you aren't enjoying the game, it's not the developer's fault. So, I mean, it's fun to be excited about something, right? It's fun to think something is going to be amazing. You're in line for a roller coaster, and it's fun to think it's going to be amazing. It's fun, and crapping on somebody just because it doesn't turn out to be that fun isn't worth it. And some of that is just our own jadedness, because people tend to, as they age, have experiences that don't live up to the first time they had that experience. And so the longer you experience something, it's not really necessarily about hitting a certain age, it's about experiences. So if you are somebody who has been to 10,000 of something, the 10,000th one is just not as exciting as the first one. And so if you're somebody who has a lot of the same life experiences over and over and over, it's very, very easy to get a little jaded. And like, what reminds me of this is that, like, we just went through a holiday season. My niece and nephew got a bunch of gifts, and they're so excited for everything they got for Christmas. In all honesty, the stuff they got for Christmas, it just isn't like a generational toy. Like, it's not something that is it's not iteratively moving forward over any of the previous generations of that toy. It's not that great. It's just a toy. Like, when you talk about reality versus hype, I don't want to, like, yuck somebody's yum just because they're excited about something. I think that's awesome. I think that's awesome. I think you should be excited about things. It's fun to be around people that are excited about things. I get that they're called nerds and dorks and all that, but I want to be around nerds and dorks. Like, that's what I want to do. I want to be around nerds and dorks. People who are pumped about what they're doing. And it's fun. It's contagious. It's great. Where I start to draw the line in that kind of your initial statement, right? Your thesis statement there. That in general, new MMO hype versus reality is when that hype gets to the point where it is so literal, so physical that you can, like, reach out and touch it. It's palpable. You can, like, feel it. Like humidity in the air, where it lingers over you and it sits there and it's sticky. Is that it gets to the point where anybody who isn't as hyped is no longer welcome. Get out, hater. I don't want that. And where that starts to be so crazy, like this, like we're in a cult, that you start to have people no longer give credit to the things that are actual things. And suddenly, instead of saying thank you for what you got them, they're like, dude, why didn't you just give me a good one? Why isn't yours just perfect? This other one was going to be perfect. This other birthday gift that didn't exist. It doesn't exist. It may never exist. Is suddenly given credit for stuff that actual video games are doing. That a MMO that might release in 2023, might release in 2024, might release in 2025, might release literally ever. It might one day release. Maybe. Who knows? Is now being like, yeah, but what makes it better than Final Fantasy or World of Warcraft or Guild Wars, that have not only done this thing, but have done it day in and day out for over a decade. They've released expansions. They've had hard times. They've had good times. They've made mistakes, they've had apologies, they've had brilliant moments, they've hit sales records. These games that have a history of real published work that did real things for real gamers on real days. And then you can have a new game coming out and people are like, so what are you gonna do when there's launch issues? And a developer who has never, ever, ever in their life released a video game and made their money from something hypothetical like real estate or working on an MLM or something like that, can come out and say, if it were me, I would just release a game that didn't have bugs. And this hypothetical game could come out and say, I would probably just make it good, because I think the reason games today aren't as good as when they were at some point in the past is that they just stopped making them good. And so we're gonna just make a good one. That's where I start to draw an issue with the distance between hype and reality. I'm perfectly okay with hype. I think it's fun. Hype is a drug. I personally don't care. If you want to eat a brownie at some point in your life, if you want to drink a beverage at some point in your life, I don't care. I don't care. You do you. As long as you're not getting behind the wheel of a car or something, I don't care. You do you. But when you start saying that that thought you had while drinking that beverage or eating that brownie is now suddenly more relevant than something that was not only thought, but was then implemented. Somebody who actually did a thing. They actually hit the publish button. And we can go out there and see it in all of its glory and all of its tragedy. We can gauge every strength and weakness in real time with actual player experience. You can screw off. Like, you can screw off. Like, it's so hard to take that seriously. So that's the only time I really struggle with, like, the hype versus reality, is when they've let that hype become bigger than reality. Right? That, like, if I go complete my first marathon and it takes me 5 hours, and then Fido comes in and goes, I was gonna do a marathon, and then I didn't. But, like, if I did, I would just do it under 2 hours. And, like, it's not hard. So you just take the 26.2 miles and you divide it by the pace that you want to do. And then you just hold that. And so you just run faster. And so, like, that's probably how I would do it. And then suddenly you guys are like, Chris. Like, it's cool that you ran a marathon and all, but did you hear about Fido's marathon? What the hell? Like, if you just didn't slow down, it would have been faster. So, like, even at the pace you did it, you could have just not slowed down. It's not hard. And so the second half of your statement was that MMOs were not designed for 10,000 hour users. And so that if a 10,000 hour user exists and they're not having fun anymore, it's their fault. That's the second half of your statement, right? Aimed at veteran MMOs where people get burned out. So this idea of, like, I want a game to get better or different because after my amount of time I'm looking for change and therefore I should just move on. Like, at the end of the day, they're only in business because they get money from consumers. So it is fair for them to go, okay, well, let's evaluate whether or not bacon even makes sense. You know what? We try to remain a kosher burger place, and so we're not going to offer bacon. But what I can do for you is I've been talking to a farmer lately, and we're gonna have a couple different kinds of tomatoes starting next month. I don't know if I really like different kinds of tomatoes in my burger, but thank you for adding some variety. I'll try it. Right? And so, like, offering other ways to play, like, that's a reasonable ask. So you see that in, like, World of Warcraft or Final Fantasy. Somebody plays for 10,000 hours, and then they're like, man, I just wish that, like, I wish that they did something different with raids. I have been raiding every raid tier, and I wish that in a raid tier they had 5 bosses instead of 4. And the answer is, well, if you just didn't play so much, why don't you just go play a game with more raid bosses? Why don't you just go play WoW? Which is sometimes what that comment becomes. It's not how you said it, Roland, but it is what it becomes. then it becomes really aggressive. It becomes this like, it's your fault. It's like, I don't want to play WoW. If I wanted to play WoW, I'd go play WoW. It's available to me. I'm actively subscribed to both. So kicking me out because I like 90% of what you do, just because you don't want to have a conversation about the other 10, is ridiculous. And so that's where I start to have an issue with that statement. In general, I do believe that, like, variety is the spice of life. Being willing to play other games. If you only like, you know, if every MMO only has 10 types of content and you only like 3 of those types, you probably are going to be pretty satisfied if you instead dip into multiple MMOs so that you can just consume the 3 buckets you like. You probably are going to have a great time that way. But I think criticism is valid. And how we communicate matters. You know, just make it good is not actionable. So, like, giving somebody actionable helps start that conversation. And not immediately assuming, well, if I make it actionable, they'll do it. That's not what I'm saying. But, like, when I look at YouTube comments, how do I become a better creator? When somebody says, I wish this guy would just get to the point. I don't even know if this video is about the title. Okay, how can I be better about answering the question of the title in a short way up front, even if I think it's a long answer, and then we'll get into the long answer? That's something I can work on. If they instead say, this video is just clickbait, bro, I don't know what to do with that. Like, there's no way for me to improve. So I'm not saying I'm going to listen to every single comment and immediately change my way of doing things. But, like, I could definitely improve. And I think as we've started at the beginning of stream watching really old videos of mine, I'd like to think I have improved. But I've improved through constructive criticism. I didn't improve through people just saying, you're great, favorite video, great, thumbs up, thumbs up, thumbs up. I improved through, you know, hey, you answered 10 questions, I actually have 1 more. Okay, well, I need to think a little differently because I'm not getting to that question. So let me think a little differently and I can try to account for that question. So I do think that a lot of 10,000 hour gamers have really good feedback on a game because they've played a lot of it. I just think that where that runs into issues is when they then assume because they're 10,000 hour players that their feedback is the most correct. And so when like a world first raider knows how to solve the loot system and all they want to solve it for is world first raiders, they're not thinking about somebody who plays casually. And so when somebody comes in and says, you know what this burger place needs, is this burger place needs to put beer cheese on burgers because I like beer cheese. And then their answer is, it would be honestly be the perfect burger shop if there was only burgers with beer cheese on it. And then you have somebody like me who doesn't eat cheese. Well, you just kicked us out. And so sometimes when somebody ends up becoming that kind of 10,000 hour player as you've described them, they've played the game so much in one way for so long that they forget that there are other ways to play. And so there are people who are like, how could you play Final Fantasy XIV and not be into the story? How could you play Final Fantasy XIV and not do Savage? How could you play Final Fantasy XIV and not try other jobs? How could you play Final Fantasy XIV and not even do crafting or gathering? Or whatever it is. Whatever it is, somebody has played for 10,000 hours, and some portion of that, hunts, whatever it is, has become such a big part of their life that they immediately assume that everybody else's life has followed that trajectory, and anybody that's not there is either wrong or new. And so there was a recent interview with Ian Hazacostas talking to Preach Gaming, and like he talked about trying to satisfy all these different users, these different ways to play. And there was a recent interview with the lead systems design, lead encounter design for World of Warcraft, sat down with Scripe, was talking about, hey, does it really make sense to have 5 difficulties of raids or whatever it is? You got LFR, normal, heroic, mythic, and then you end up with like a time walking. So I don't remember if he counted it as 4 or 5, but like, does it really make sense to have this? And so, does it really make sense to have this? It's just an honest question. It wasn't accusatory at all. And the systems designer said, well, we look at the data, and on average, the average person that engages with this content engages with 1 to 2 of the raid types. So, if you just listen to that on its surface, that most people will not raid at more than 2 difficulties in a tier, you do kind of think, you could hear that as, well, Scribe's question means, Scribe's question followed by Matt's answer means that they should not support more than 2. However, if you listen to his entire answer, it's not all the same 2. There are people that only do LFR and a little bit of normal. They only do normal and a little bit of heroic. They only do heroic and a little bit of mythic or whatever. People that engage in 2 are usually doing mostly 1 tier and a little bit of the other. Maybe they're a heroic raid group and they're running an alt through normal with a friend, but doesn't get very far. Whatever it is. Which means the reason we offer them all is because they all matter. In the interview with Ghostcrawler and Cannon, he said PvP is maybe in a game only 5 or 10% of the population. So is PvP important to an MMO? And Ghostcrawler's response was, 10%'s a lot. You might have less than 10% of players that play Warrior, and we should have Warrior. Right? They're 6.3, coming out January 10th for Final Fantasy XIV, put an immense amount of effort into the Paladin class. That's it. Just the Paladin. Other classes might get some balance changes, but it was heavily invested in Paladin. How many people across all of Final Fantasy during the 6.3 to 6.4 cycle will main or spend a decent percentage of their time in a given week or a given month on Paladin? Right? How many? I don't know. But while it is a small percentage, it is a large number. And if that's not a good enough reason, if you can let Paladin die, then you can let any job die. Having a combat system that is balanced as a whole is good for everybody. Everybody. You cannot have a good combat system if you have some junk jobs. Even if you have hard data that says a very small percentage, it can still matter. And I think WoW has run into that problem with their narrative. The percentage of WoW players that are associated with playing the game primarily for lore. Primarily for lore. Not I like the game and I like the lore. Primarily for lore. Is a small percentage. But it still matters. And it's very hard. If you ever realize I want lore to be a bigger thing, it's very, very hard to deal with the lore later. So they're having an issue with Shadowlands and Dragonflight where they're trying to take the lore more seriously. They are. You can see it in their campaign quests. You can see it in their trailers. You can see it in the things they talk about at panels. They are absolutely trying to make lore a stronger part of WoW. Not necessarily relative to raiding or anything else, but relative to itself. What is the lore in Dragonflight versus what is the lore in vanilla? They are trying to make the lore stronger. But they are having to deal with a muscle that's atrophied. They're having to work out the narrative muscle of the game where that hasn't been the thing. It's been really hard. I think it's why Chris Metzen came back. Absolutely, Wendy. And that's a two-way street. That's an interview. Chris Metzen was having a perfectly successful career post-Blizzard. So, that's a two-way street. So it's not only they decided that having Metzen back around would help Denuzer and others keep the narrative in a good direction, the creative control in a good direction. But I have a feeling that Chris probably had a lot of questions for them too. I'm not just coming back so you can put my name on the door. I've seen what you've been doing, and if I'm coming back, here's some directions I'd want to see it go. You're giving me a leadership role. So if I'm expected to lead, here's where I want it to go. And I have to assume, and I think a lot of other people feel like it's fair to assume, that Chris Metzen wants it being real lore. I think it's really hard to ignore a part of game and then one day wake up and realize you should have been taking care of it. So you want to see them take care of parts of games, even if they're small. And that means that the 10,000 hour players deserve care. But that also means that the 1 hour players deserve care. That if somebody says, I tried Final Fantasy XIV and I didn't like it, and you say, how long did you play it for? And they said, I tried it over a weekend. I played 6 or 8 hours. There are a lot of people in this community who go, well, then you didn't try it. I think the 10,000 hour thing is, I just don't want to live in a gaming community where we get to dismiss a portion of the players. If you are playing an MMO in a way that you are having fun and it is not directly hurting somebody else's fun, you're doing it right.